Very excited now to be joined by friend of the show, Glenn Greenwald, to talk about the media environment and how it may resemble the war in Iraq. Glenn, of course, was one of the people fighting against the administration and exposing the truth there at the time, and so can see a lot of these parallels. Glenn, one of the things we wanted to start with here is your observation about how the different U.S. media organizations are used as tools of Israel and the U.S. intelligence community. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. As you know, we have two side-by-side stories yesterday. One is Iran is eager to negotiate with the U.S. and Israel to end the war, but CNN says Iran refuses to negotiate while under attack and until its retaliation against Israel is completed. As you say, disinformation is always a weapon of war, and it lets people believe what they want. So given your experience now covering so much of these PSYOPs and others by the intelligence community, by various foreign governments, what can we tell the audience about the warnings for how to navigate this very difficult information environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think usually now people are trained to understand that if they're getting some claim that is laundered through the media from anonymous sources, that it's often necessary to apply skepticism to it. People have learned that lesson well. But when it comes time to war, especially when the governments are selling wars to people, when they're attempting to scare them into supporting a war, skepticism is almost not even enough. You have to kind of begin by disbelieving what it is that you're being told, knowing how often almost automatically disinformation is deliberately deployed. So it is a weapon of war. It's something that every government at war does. And we've seen over and over that our corporate media is not just incapable of guarding against it, but eager to participate in its dissemination. And that's the reason we've been deceived so many times into wars. And so you have to look back at history to get a guide for how to navigate what you're seeing currently.
Yeah, I mean, the number of conflicting reports that come out, I mean, even if you, outside of this administration, the number of reports we got from Barack Ravid about how Biden was super, super mad at Netanyahu, and then Trump comes into office and he's also super, super mad at Netanyahu. And, I think to your point, especially when you have the Trump administration just admitting that they lied to the Iranians, the American people, to the world about their intent to go forward with negotiations as a ruse to create an element of surprise for these Israeli attacks. Whatever credence you were giving them previously has to be completely thrown out the window at this point.
Yeah, even there, I mean, that is what the United States is claiming. That is what Donald Trump is claiming, because I do believe that's what happened. I do believe, at least recently, that the U.S. was negotiating with Iran and leading them to believe that they still wanted a diplomatic solution as a way of getting Iran to believe no attack was coming, to let the Israelis and the U.S. attack them with surprise. But it's not. But let's assume that isn't the case. Let's assume that what happened was what they made to look like what happened, which was that the U.S. was saying, no, don't do this. And then Israel went and did it anyway, meaning defied Trump's orders, humiliated the United States, humiliated Donald Trump by ruining his diplomatic attempts after he told Israel not to do it. Even then, what would Trump do? He wouldn't stand up and admit that Netanyahu humiliated him. They would probably have an interest, U.S. officials would, in pretending that Trump was in on that plan all along, that he wasn't surprised by it or defied, that this was actually Trump's war. And he's been speaking that way all the time. And I think I'm so glad you mentioned Barack Ravid, because he's such a perfect example of the kind of skepticism that we ought to have. This is a person who's an Israeli citizen. He was in the IDF reserves until 2023. He worked in the most notorious intelligence unit, and he has become basically the go-to reporter for understanding U.S.-Israeli relations, because he just takes whatever he's told to write down from both governments and goes and prints it completely uncritically. And he won the White House Journalism Award for doing so, which reflects the kind of stenographic function that they continue to see themselves in, especially when it comes to foreign policy and wars. They don't question the government. They're there to publish what they're told and to stand on the side of the government. And that's what makes this combination of politics and media propaganda so potent and so dangerous.
Well, it's actually kind of a useful function. If you know that's what he's doing, it's actually useful. You go, okay, well, this is what they want us to believe. This is what they're trying to sell to the public. But it has to be read through that particular lens. Before we transition to talking about some of the Iraq War parallels and lessons learned from that era, because some of the similarities are really, really eerie. You talked about President Trump people trying to scare us into war. This is scaring me, but not in the direction of war. He posted this long text that he got from Mike Huckabee, who is this, evangelical end times believer who also happens to be our U.S. ambassador to Israel. And so Trump posted on Truth Social this, what they describe as a powerful message that he received from Mike Huckabee that reads, Mr. President, God spared you in Butler, Pennsylvania to be the most consequential president in a century, maybe ever. The decisions on your shoulders I would not want to be made by anyone else. You have many voices speaking to you, sir, but there is only one voice that matters, his voice. I am your appointed servant in this land, and I am available for you, but I do not try to get in your presence often because I trust your instincts. No president in my lifetime has been in a position like yours, not since Truman in 1945. I don't reach out to persuade you, only to encourage you. I believe you will hear from heaven, and that voice is far more important than mine or anyone else's. You sent me to Israel to be your eyes, ears, and voice, and make sure our flag flies above our embassy. My job is to be the last one to leave. I will not abandon this post. Our flag will not come down. You did not seek this moment. This moment sought you. It is my honor to serve you. Your thoughts about that?
Well, it's not just alarming that Huckabee wrote that, but that Trump took it and himself published it because Trump clearly believes it to be true. You know, I heard from a lot of people that everybody, I think, assumed that Trump's marching around as some sort of evangelical Christian for most of his political career was a ruse. But I heard from a lot of people who know Trump very well that especially after that assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, which admittedly, you know, was something that I think would transform anybody, coming that close to death, but avoiding it, that he really did become convinced that there was some divine intervention that saved him for a reason. And it's so ironic that we're hearing that the reason Iran is so dangerous is because they're a theocratic regime that doesn't care about anything other than the belief that God is telling them what to do, when that not only obviously affects and shapes Israel's foreign policy, but I think is shaping Donald Trump's as well. And I think what is really alarming is if you look at what Trump has been saying the last 24 to 48 hours, he's clearly trying to at least send the signal, whether it's to Iran or Israel or to whomever, that he is about to do something of historic proportions, which is what Bibi Netanyahu thinks about himself as well. They're both people in their mid to late 70s, which is when they start thinking about how they're thought of once they're dead, not what the rest of us have to deal with as a result of their decisions. And I think the kind of mindset that they're in now, as evidenced by Trump posting that Huckabee email, is one that is genuinely alarming and dangerous. And I say that as somebody who's not typically alarmist.
No, you're absolutely right, Glenn. And you know, what really strikes me with the Bush parallel and Iraq, this is a good transition, is one of the things that really struck me in reading a lot about Bush is he really believed that he had been saved from addiction and like put on this earth and sent to the White House to save the United States during 9/11. And that really was a huge impact on why he decided to go into the war in Iraq. And so, you know, bringing this like full circle is not only that, the media aspect here, but what drives me crazy, and I'm sure it must you as well, is we have the same actors literally the same people who lied us into the war in Iraq now really repeating so many of the same things. We had Ari Fleischer talking about Tucker Carlson, and this is the guy who lied from the White House podium about weapons of mass destruction. Glenn Beck, who was on television talking about how America would be greeted as liberators, he apologized in 2014, but you know, Glenn, he's back now to actually saying, this time around, they're going to be greeted as liberators. Let's take a listen to that and we'll get your reaction.
Has Israel asked us to fight their war? Answer, no. Is this another Iraq? Or is it something entirely different? Well, let me tell you what makes this moment unlike anything else we have faced before. First, this was not a call to war. This was not a land invasion. This is not a campaign to topple a regime and then sit around for 20 years trying to rebuild a culture that doesn't want what we have. Even though Iran, the Iranian people are good people, the Persians are great people, and they do want a life like ours. But this was targeted. This was surgical. This was preemptive. Not against an idea, not against a guess, against the very real, very stated intentions of a regime run by men who do not think like we think, okay? They do not want what we want. We choose life. They literally choose death. These are 12ers. They are followers of a branch of Shiite Islam that believes not just in the return of the messianic figure called the Mahdi, but also that his return can and must be, in their words, hastened or accelerated. And the only way to do that is to, quote, using their words, wash the world in blood. Okay, I think I'm out at that. You know, that's my first stop on the train, and I'm like, I'm going to get off here, please.
They hate our way of life. They choose. I mean, this is 03. This is the same thing. You could probably copy and paste that. And then, except this time they're different because they're Persian, which, by the way, is very racist against Arabs. But you know, it's like, well, what are we doing here, Glenn?
Also, isn't it kind of ironic that we're supposed to be scared of Iran because they have a messianic religious belief, and like a third of the Congress wants to arm and support Israel no matter what because of their messianic view that doing so is necessarily for the return of Jesus, who's then going to send all Jews and other non-believers to hell. But that's a little detail that Israel doesn't mind because they don't actually believe that, and they're happy for the support. But, you know, Saagar, the thing is, like, the comparison with Iran, with Iraq rather, despite it not being planned originally as a regime change or a ground invasion, is so obvious, right? Like, we're being told the reason we have to start this war, which is a war that the United States and Israel started, not Iran, is because they were developing extremely dangerous nuclear weapons, and they're so psychotic and dictatorial and unhinged that we can't allow them to have a nuclear weapon, which is exactly how the war in Iraq was justified. And I honestly did, of course, I knew that from the start, but when you go back and look at the speeches, and you see that the exact same people are uttering the exact same phrases, it's not even an attempt to modify the script a little bit.
Yes.
You know, just as one example, George Bush's big speech in September 7th, rather, in 2002 in Cincinnati was, yes, we can't give you proof that Iraq has nuclear weapons, but you don't want the smoking gun to be in the form of a mushroom cloud over your city. Ted Cruz went on Fox News and said exactly the same thing when asked about proof that Iran has nuclear weapons. And this is what's scary is a week ago, every MAGA person, basically, every person, if you showed them, look, Israel has been saying for 30 years that Iran is a week away or a month away or a year away from nuclear weapons, and it never turned out to be true, would say, yeah, we're not going to fall for that again. The bombs start dropping, Trump's involved, boom. Everybody wants to cheer for it, and so you just give them on a silver platter this obviously bullshit excuse, which is that Iran has an active nuclear weapons program, which Tulsi Gabbard herself said 3 months ago is the consensus of the intelligence community is untrue, and now it's just the assumption within every media discussion that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons, and the only question is, do you want to go to war to stop them or do you want to let them have it? It's mind-blowing how propaganda works, even if it's identical to the one that 25 years ago we all watched prove to be completely disgraced and debunked.
That is absolutely right. And, you know, another person who was at the scene of the crime last time as well, Bibi Netanyahu. Here's a little flashback to the case he was making at the time.
And this is a tyrant who is feverishly trying to acquire nuclear weapons. And today, the United States must destroy the same regime because a nuclear-armed Saddam will place the security of our entire world at risk. It is simply not reflecting the reality to assume that Saddam isn't feverishly working to develop nuclear weapons. As we speak. If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. Principles of real estate, the 3 L's, location, location, location. The 3 principles of winning the war on terror are the 3 W's, winning, winning, and winning. The more victories you amass, the easier the next victory becomes. The first victory in Afghanistan makes the second victory in Iraq that much easier. The second victory in Iraq will make the third victory that much easier, less than dismantling his regime will do.
If you take out Saddam, I guarantee you it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region because he's feverishly working to develop nuclear weapons.
You know, I think there's so many interesting parts to that testimony that you showed, that even though just those excerpts that I think are self-evident. But you notice at the end, too, he said, the more you win, the easier the wins become. So the first one in Afghanistan will make the second one in Iraq all the easier. And then and of course, we didn't win in either. And then he said that second win will make the third win easier still. What did he mean by the third win? Neocons at that point and into 2003 and 4 were very open about the fact that they didn't want to stop at Baghdad. You know, there was that phrase that was leaked by Karl Rove or somebody like that, Paul Wolfowitz, saying real men go to Tehran. Yep. The plan always was to go topple Saddam and then go get regime change in Iran. And I think that's the other point that we have to be so aware of. Glenn Beck said this time it's not about regime change. Why are they bombing Tehran then? There are no nuclear facilities in Tehran. Why did Trump order 16 million people to evacuate Tehran as though they're going to destroy Tehran where there's no nuclear facilities there either? It's because this is a regime change where they want to change the regime of Iran. They want to turn it into Syria, where they just have a collapse of the central government, all these factions being backed by the CIA and the Mossad trying to take over Iran, or at the very least rendering Iran impotent and letting Israel control the entire Middle East and therefore the United States as well. That is the real goal of everything that they're doing. And so maybe it'll end quickly if Trump drops the biggest bombs we have on every population center, or maybe it'll lead to troops having to be activated if Iran attacks our troops in response, an oil facility. You don't know once you unleash a war like this what the results are going to be. And that was what we learned from Iraq when we were told it would take 2 weeks to get rid of Saddam.
Glenn, this is my final question here. I think they've won. I think the neocons have won, and look, I could be totally wrong. There could be some last minute thing, but I do think the U.S. is going to get offensively involved at this point. I have very, very little hope. So I do know that at least something is going to happen. 48th order consequences always do. And the neocons are going to run away from that. And since we were somehow unsuccessful in holding them to account over the last 25 years, what could we do differently to hold these people to account and actually tie them to their decisions? Or is that just structurally impossible here in Washington, D.C.?
That was the other thing that really struck me, Saagar, as we prepared our own show last night, going through these 2002 and 2003 interviews, is that the people who went on television and just told outright lies in the most assertive, authoritative form possible, none of them had their careers even remotely impeded, let alone destroyed. In fact, they all continue to thrive to this very day. They're still the ones making the decisions. They're still the ones in charge. And one of the things that I thought would at least be promising this time was that there's this big section of MAGA that would turn against Trump if he actually got the country involved in a major war with Iran on behalf of Israel. And you're already seeing, like, one of the reasons Trump came out yesterday and publicly scorned and humiliated Tucker Carlson was it was a message to everybody. Look, if you even think about raising your voice against me, you will be out. We're going to exclude you from MAGA. You will no longer be welcome at the White House. You'll have no influence. It was a way of keeping them all into line. And you're already seeing many of them who had been saying, don't go to war with Iran or it's going to ruin your presidency, snapping into line and saying, you know what, I trust President Trump. I'm sure he's going to do the right thing. We need to get rid of this regime. And I don't see any hope of that happening, unfortunately.
Charlie Kirk last night goes on and, I trust President Trump. He was made for this moment. I'm sure it's going to all work out great. Yeah, I mean, and very few people, like Tucker has his own, base of support and is independent, whatever. There are very few people in the right-wing ecosystem who can exist outside of just like Trump support. So yeah, they're gonna take that message in. Glenn, thank you so much. You've been doing incredible work here. I also would love for people. We were originally booked you to talk about Palantir.
Yeah, I know. You gotta come back.
Still do that in the future.
I gotta come back. They still matter.
Hey, business is gonna boom for them. Okay, all right. All my neighbors here in Virginia, they're all about to get filthy rich. So I guess we can all be.
Well, they also sponsored
very
that great military parade over the weekend too. So things are looking good for them and Lockheed Martin and many others. Yep. All right, Glenn.
Absolutely.
Great to see you. Take care.
Great to see you guys. Bye.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.